Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm David Rosensweet. I'm a holistic medical doctor that has specialized in treating women and men for the last 30 years with compounded bioidentical hormones. And along my journey, I get to meet up with people who really know stuff. And when I see one that does, boy, instant colleagueships can easily occur. And I've known Carol Petersen, a pharmacist deep in the beginnings of the compounding world, a real pioneer. Carol started before the wheel was invented, I think. Is that true, Carol?
About so.
And yes, it's such a privilege to be able to turn to friends, colleagues, and people who know things, so that when I have a challenge in my practice or in our teaching, Carol is one of my go-to people. And welcome, Carol. Good to see
Thank you. So many new and delightful things. Just a few days ago, and I think I spared you, I thought that I found something new and exciting. I was staring at the progesterone molecule because I'm working on a little bit of a presentation on the history of hormones in general. And I'm looking at the molecule, and what do I see? Free methyl groups. And I go, oh, could progesterone be a methyl donor? That's what I said.
Boy, that's fascinating. Well, tell us why being a methyl donor could be so significant.
So methylation is required for detoxification of estrogens, all sorts of them. Also is required for detoxification, major pathway for adrenaline, which is another piece I think that needs to evolve a little bit more. The impact of adrenaline on some of the symptoms we think might be caused by excess estrogen activity. I think they're like two peas in a pod, that you have to maybe look at these irregular heartbeats, anxiety, panic, sleeplessness. We've been framing it as an estrogen dominant state and getting some relief with progesterone. But I think we also have to consider the adrenaline piece in there.
Very interesting. So methylation of adrenaline is what you're saying is where the potential value could be?
Yes, I think there's a big value here, and also methylation of excess estrogen, because there are women who go and get tested and their estrogen levels are incredibly high. A woman just sent me 2 of her tests. So let's say a normal estradiol on a serum test could be maybe 30, 50 at a real low, going all the way up into the 500s. She was 2,200.
Wow.
That's what I said.
Was she in the perimenopause? Was she in the perimenopause?
Peri.
Yeah.
And then finally, you don't always get this. You have to talk to people. They will tell you what's wrong with them if you listen to them long enough. And if you listen to them even longer,
whoa, you're really getting radical
what
now.
to do.
Listen, did I hear that properly? Listening to the patient?
Yes. So interesting enough with this patient, this particular one, all of a sudden in our discussion, she's also telling me that she's done the gene test and has some MTHFR issues. Like, whoa. It looks like, some methylation is needed, and certainly her symptoms also align with a hyperadrenaline state. And then I even told her, because I was talking with her shortly after I was staring at the molecule of progesterone, that there were methylation groups there, and maybe that had an impact or a pathway that we haven't looked at as far as our ability to handle our metabolism. So I thought I
Explain
would
that.
be
Please explain the relationship of the gene and the gene irregularity there and methylation, and then once again tie it into both the detoxification or the metabolization of adrenaline and wherever else methylation is really critical.
Well, it's critical. Methylation is an essential conjugation. The liver detoxes. Phase 2 is always a conjugation. So you hook on methyl groups, you hook on sulfur groups, you hook on glucuronides. You are always detoxifying with the liver. So this is one of the essential pathways for the liver to get rid of toxins of all sorts, but it's also processing our normal input of our hormones. Our hormones are not static. We don't have a hormone being delivered by our body, and it's always at the same level all the time. We are human beings. We fluctuate all the time. It's also a mistake, I think, and I think you'll agree with me, that when we're evaluating people with hormones, I see practitioners depending on maybe doing an estradiol, progesterone, testosterone, particularly conventional doctors who have not had the opportunity to really consider how the whole endocrine system gets involved with how your body's working. So I like the more hormones you can look at, the better. Now, I know you're a real fan of the 24-hour urine test, and I am too. I think it's a gold standard, very well documented in the literature. And so what do we see with that? We see about 40 hormones, don't we? When we do
Metabolites, yeah.
Yeah, so compare that to a serum with just 3 things. So the more things you can look at, the better idea of relationships and what happens here and there and wherever. So for example, this woman with this terribly high estradiol at 2200, guess what else? When you have this blood test, sex hormone binding globulin was sky high. Well,
yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, because estrogens are increasing the sex hormone binding globulins preferentially, but they bind the androgens, DHEA, testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, get bound up more so. So you're sort of slowing the activity of those androgen hormones, and perhaps the estrogen too. But sex hormone binding globulin, really interesting. Often we say that it is unavailable to the cells if your blood's carrying sex hormone binding globulin and it's elevated, but your body also has a system for cells to take up the sex hormone binding globulin with the hormone, kind of a phagocytosis kind of thing, eating it up. Once inside the cell, the hormone is released. Now, I have no idea, no appreciation for how much of this can happen. It's dependent on a carrier molecule. If that's not happening, it's not going to be an option. But here's another thing. We really need to dive in deeper. We just don't know all the facets playing into things. And I've been at this for well over 30 years now, and I am surprised and delighted all the time with new information. So let me get back to
I want to back you up for a minute.
Okay.
I apologize for one thing for looking like I'm looking aside. I was so fascinated by your description of the progesterone molecule that I wanted to find one to share with everyone and show those methyl groups that you're talking about. And because I want to back us right into that discussion. There they are.
Look at that. Oh,
This is the
okay.
progest. Go ahead,
Yeah.
take it away. This is what
So
you saw.
that's exactly what I saw. And I go, my goodness, because like betaine, trimethylglycine is a good methyl donor, as an example. And it has 3 methyl groups. So I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we have some opportunities here. Now, this is interesting too. I looked up testosterone, 2 methyl groups. I looked up estrone, estradiol, estradiol, 1 methyl group. And that probably explains why we're having to methylate the estrogens for detoxification. And maybe not, this is not a pathway for progesterone to be metabolized. But
I'm still want to back you up now because you just went down this phenomenal trail of you're suggesting that one of the consequences, let's say, of a hot flash, which is very stressful to a woman, is the pouring out of the biochemistry of fight or flight, led by vanguard adrenaline. And we know that progesterone can modulate and calm down so many symptoms of the menopause. And you're suggesting that perhaps progesterone is one of its actions is that it is donating methyl groups so as to metabolize that adrenaline. Did I have that right?
yes, you have that right. So I should get a Nobel Prize. But
Yeah.
I have I put this out to people and been shut down a little bit. And I went to do some research on it, and I don't find any papers that go in that direction. But what did I find? Progesterone receptors. You can find a lot on progesterone receptors, and there need to be methylated. So is this the mechanism, maybe not a methyl donor in general as we're thinking about it, but maybe for the action of progesterone to happen, it has to work on the need of its receptors for methylation.
Wow. I love it. Now I'd like to back you up a little more. Did the woman that the patient you're describing in the perimenopause who had the 2200 of the estradiol, was she also having symptoms of estrogen deficiency? And my question really comes down to, I know testing women in the perimenopause can be treacherous because they don't have this nice, smooth ovarian output that they have when they're young. They start getting an erratic, high peaks, low troughs, high peaks. And I found this out by testing a woman in the perimenopause. She was having hot flashes every night. I was almost certain she was estrogen deficient. And she showed up with a high estrogen. And here I want to treat her with estrogen to alleviate the hot flashes. And she looks at me like I'm out of my mind because I'm showing her a test that I asked for that shows high estrogen. So I'm going to start by asking you, is that a quirk of the perimenopause, or do you think she was running over the course of a full month elevated estradiol levels?
Okay, I have 2 parts to this answer. The first part is she also gave me test results. She had Quest results in the first place, that laboratory, and then went to LabCorp a couple weeks later. And guess what she had? 199. What a beautiful illustration of what you just said. And that's exactly what I explained to her during the peri. You can have these extreme shifts. And I think those extreme shifts with estrogen might be by supplementing with estrogen, you kind of smooth out those extremes. And that may be how estrogen works for hot flashes. But I don't know that that's been demonstrated clearly enough. I believe the adrenals are involved very much, the adrenal hormones. And the other thing, primary to all of this, is insulin glucose. And most ancient and fundamental of our hormones I was very interested to hear from a colleague. She had a client who was wearing a continuous glucose monitor. When she had a hot flash, her glucose dropped down to 50. So
Wow.
I know we don't even think that's
Counterintuitive. Please continue.
So her glucose is dropping. So her insulin glucose control is lost somehow. When your glucose drops, that's a signal to your adrenal glands to flood you with adrenaline to get glucose back up. That's what it's doing. And there you are. And then you're stuck. Now, cortisol is probably going up too, but you're getting these real excitatory and panic and anxiety kind of symptoms from high adrenaline. Then couple that with a sort of downregulated ability of your body to get rid of that adrenaline, and you're stuck with it.
Yeah, the 50-year-old liver does not behave like a 20-year-old liver did. We could dismantle caffeine hour after hour after hour after dinner, at midnight if we needed to stay up to study. We'd have to drink a cup of coffee every hour, but at 50, there's very few people who are going to drink a cup of coffee at dinner time even, because they're going to stay up, because it's going to take that 50-year-old liver quite a time to dismantle that adrenaline. Sorry to interrupt you there.
Okay, I do want to answer part 2 of.
Okay, I want to back you up to part 1.
Okay.
I got hung up around, why is there the hot flash plus the high insulin? I mean, the insulin must have elevated to get the hypoglycemia.
Yes, it has to be.
And is the insulin part of the fight or flight biology? What, explain how the hot flash was coupled with an elevated insulin, if you can.
It was coupled, illustrated by wearing the continuous glucose monitor.
Right. Yes.
So, this is technology that we didn't have available to us before. Hot flashes are somewhat of a medical mystery. We're not quite sure of the whole etiology of this, but I think this is an important piece that we just learned, and I'd like to see that duplicated with maybe a few patients who have hot flashes before they're treated, to see if this is a trend we could see over and over and over again. It makes perfect sense to me. Then coupled with, we are having so much of symptomatic people as they're aging, and this hyperinsulin piece, we haven't been very good at diagnosing. And a really good book on this topic, Ben Bickman's Why We Get Sick. He's been studying insulin. I learned another little pearl at A4M, but I want to get back to finish my second part of this patient before I lose her. So she's estrogen dominant. Why do I think so? She had an ultrasound done too. So she's got 3 small ovarian cysts. She's got a polyp in her uterus, and her endometrial lining was thick. So these are physical signs of excess estrogen activity, no matter what the blood tests were saying, up or down or whatever. So it's good collaboration. It would be interesting to have tested your patient at that particular time, but maybe wasn't any good reason to do it. But she, because of that high estradiol, because of polyps, small polyp cysts, so they're recommending a full hysterectomy and oophorectomy to her. And I'm going to try and save her. So
how would you save her? How will you save her?
I'm going to save her by making sure she has plenty of progesterone. I'm going to pay attention to those detoxification pathways with her, particularly methyl, but she might need sulfur. Like glutathione, our liver's biggest detoxer, provides sulfur so you can detox estrogen, and back to your liver sluggish and not doing that very well. And having those things on board, giving her some supplements which give her extra methyl groups or sulfur groups. She could use glutathione, and she can use other sulfur providing things like DIM does, for instance, and all this broccoli eating supplies sulfur groups, all the cruciferous vegetables. That's why we're being told to eat our cruciferous vegetables at menopause. It's for all those sulfur groups that we can provide.
I'm going to interrupt you again. So the general strategy here, just so I can just reiterate it, because sometimes it's so valuable for me to hear it again, is this woman has a demonstrated very high estrogen, not only in the short run by the blood test, but in the ultrasound showing a thickened endometrial lining. I don't know if she had a mammogram around that time and saw increased breast density. And so you're thinking there's a couple things to think about here. And one of them is making sure that she can move the high estrogen out of her body so that she can reduce her estrogen levels. So you're looking at supporting the liver in a couple ways, both with other things that it can conjugate that estrogen with, sulfur, etc., and also the methyl group, which you've uncovered here. And God knows if the progesterone is going to be donate some methyl. And then what doses of, do I have that right, Carol? Then what doses of the methyl group, of progesterone we talking about here?
Okay, you already know me to be very generous with progesterone, and it comes from dealing with women with severe PMS and treating them according to Dr. Katarina Dalton's philosophy. And her book was published 1953, once a month. And she listed all these symptoms of PMS, premenstrual syndrome, a big list of things. And if anything, we probably can add to it today, but she was spot on. And she treated her patients at a minimum. This was her starting dose, 600 milligram vaginal suppositories. And you might need a few of those per day. But these women were homicidal, suicidal, at the end of their rope because they couldn't sleep, very difficult to live with because they were anxious, they were angry, so they're losing their relationships. It's a really, really sad story. And they can almost not cope with working or living. There are women who have suicided because of PMS, untreated PMS.
It's so critical. The people don't grok how much the feminine body loves progesterone, how calming it is, how many hormones are calming. Most of them are stimulating, and how crazy women can feel and how awful they can feel when that progesterone is not there.
Okay, so now I want to talk about somewhat of a disservice Dr. John Lee did, although I'll credit him enormously for having written a book about progesterone, and he went and traveled the country speaking about the benefit of progesterone, particularly with reference to osteoporosis. However, the other things were included. So he said, we don't make more than 20 milligrams a day of progesterone. And so if you use that 20 milligrams in a cream or something, that's all you should need. Fortunately, John Lee created problems, and he even acknowledged once I had a recording, and he said, if you use the cream and you're having issues with it, just keep going. In 9 months, everything will even out and you'll be fine. Tell me a woman that's going to wait 9 months for results. Zero.
I'd really like to break that down. I mean, you're like a 4th of July of information here. I can't having a little challenge keeping up with it because there's so many important things. Yes, the human ovary, the female ovary, maximum in the 3rd week of a cycle puts out 37 milligrams plus or minus of progesterone, dumps it right into the bloodstream. When you're applying a 18 milligrams of cream to the skin, that's not dumping it right into the bloodstream. I mean, you're a compounding pharmacist. What's the data on how much of that is, what percentage of that application to the skin is actually absorbed, would you say?
Very good question. I have 2 parts to that too. So Dr. David Zava once told me that the absorption he has seen from various cream bases varied as much as low as 10% and as high as 80%. So you can't say what's on goes in. Then I also, the second part, I caution those women or men who have symptoms of hypothyroidism. The topical application may not be as effective as you think because the hormone gets through the skin barrier, the stratus corneum, that's the barrier to it, and it goes into the bloodstream. But when you use a cream, not all of the progesterone is in solution so it can go through the skin. So what happens is that the oils on your skin have to dissolve the progesterone from the cream that is not already in solution. Now, if you use a gel formula of hormones, that's already totally in solution, goes through a lot easier. But if it hasn't been dissolved in your carrier cream or whatever, you still have the work of getting it dissolved on your skin. Now, people with hypothyroidism have very poor circulation to the skin. The skin will be dry and you might have cold extremities, cold hands and feet, because you're not getting good blood flow there. If you're not getting good blood flow to your skin, another thing, another physical sign of low thyroid is pale. If you're not nice and pink, if you're Caucasian, you're not getting the blood flow to the skin, and it creates a challenge to get through the skin. It's not that you can't use the skin as the vehicle for getting it in, but you have to bear in mind that there is a challenge, and your percentage of what you need to use may be higher than another person's, or you may want to choose another dosage route to use the hormones. And you often see, I see women using, I saw this before 30 years ago, women using all sorts of applications. They're using oral, they're using rectal, vaginal, topical on the skin, sublingual drops or lozenges, all of these. So I don't really care what dosage form you use. This is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for effectiveness, and I'm looking for something you will do.
And this takes us down to a basic clinical principle that the numbers isn't the issue. It's really, if a woman is deficient in progesterone, we want to give her progesterone, and we want to be very rich in it because a woman's body is very rich in progesterone. And no matter where you start, this is what I like to do. I like to bring that progesterone level up high enough that a woman feels it. And I like to take it higher when in some instances like PMDD or in osteoporosis. I like to take it to, like, a woman takes a progesterone at night, for example. She doesn't have to take it only at night, but I like her to wake up the next morning with symptoms of overdose of progesterone, because it'll make you too calm. It'll make you feel groggy. It'll make you feel like you had an overdose of a sleeping pill. That tells me that she's limited out. And then all we have to do is back down from there, because we want, in many instances, a very robust amount of progesterone. So the numbers and how much the percentage of absorption and what route, not so, I agree with you entirely. That's not the real issue. It's like getting a rich amount of progesterone in so many women. Do you agree with that?
Yes. Now, let me address a couple other things. And I'm just horrified because I've seen this in endocrinology textbook that's favored by medical students. They have to learn it. So we have the menstrual cycle, everything low in the follicular level for progesterone, estrogen's higher. Then we have the surge of progesterone that occurs after ovulation. And estrogen's still pretty high there too, has another peak. However, those charts have progesterone numbers that come in nanograms per milliliter, and the estrogen is in picograms. So you have to visualize in your mind that line for progesterone that looks like it's bottom out really needs to be 1,000 times what it is there, and it's far above the estrogen levels in the follicular phase.
I want to show this. I want to show this. This is such an important concept to get. And this is the chart as it's most commonly shown. I'm going to share. I'm sorry. I think you can see it here, though. This is the chart as it's commonly shown. Estrogen and progesterone seemingly on the same plane with one another. And this is how it actually is. That progesterone is off the charts. That turns out that there's about 100 times more progesterone in any given cycle. And here's the paradox that you show, that estrogen is reported in nanograms per milliliter, and progesterone, if we translate it, I'm sorry, picograms per milliliter.
Yeah.
Is this illustrating what you're saying there?
No, because look how flat progesterone is in the first part. It's 37. That's high luteal. Is that a number for high luteal?
That's sort of a common number. There's a range.
Okay, so you can imagine that 1,000 times higher, if you can.
Yeah, and so instead of 127, which is another average, it's actually 12,850. And the thing I want to point out is that it's often shown that estrogen is higher in the early phases of the cycle, but it's not. Progesterone, although depicted in common charts as being lower, it's actually higher. There's actually twice as much progesterone coming out. A lot of that's coming out of the adrenal gland. Progesterone's there throughout the cycle, more than throughout the entire cycle. There's ovarian secretion.
And the follicular would be coming from the adrenals.
Yes.
And it needs.
But progesterone is always present.
Yes. It's not a start and stop situation. Although if you're having trouble with skipped ovulation and want to treat the luteal phase only or ovarian insufficiency. Okay, so back to John Lee. So I don't know where he got his number, and he's passed away, so I can't find it. But then I I searched the literature, really didn't find anything, but maybe I didn't see what he said. So you never can prove the negative, right? So I reached out to Dr. Ray Peat. Dr. Ray Peat was behind Dr. John Lee using progesterone in the first place because he was a biochemist and he studied progesterone. So I asked him, and he immediately says, well, I think John just made that up. And he sent me a link to a study, and it was somebody measuring the ovary output and got 100 milligrams per day. So that's a big difference already. Then let's consider this. We're so tied up into the endocrine idea that we have an organ that's doing something, like the adrenals and the ovaries and the testes for men. So we have every Schwann cell in our body makes pregnenolone, precursor to progesterone, and progesterone, and uses it to keep our neuronal tissue in good repair. The Schwann cells need that. That's de novo synthesis. It's not going into our bloodstream. We're using it right there. Also, the brain. The brain has de novo synthesis from cholesterol. We've got plenty of cholesterol in our brain. All the enzymes are there to make the whole steroid cascade. So our brain is a manufacturer of progesterone too. Another big thing that we're not looking at very much, to my surprise, whenever I hear something, I start looking at what's the connection to hormones. We have mast cell activation syndrome, these huge releases of histamine and people being miserable. Well, guess what? Inside those little mast cells is a whole hormone factory. And if you're low in progesterone, you're going to have histamine release triggered by high estrogen inside your mast cell. Well, that doesn't go in the bloodstream either. So we have, who knows how much progesterone we actually produce. Our bodies produce tons of it. And so when we tell people that your ovaries make 20 milligrams a day and you shouldn't exceed using that much on a dosage form that may not be absorbed very well, wow, we're missing the boat big time. And there was articles actually published that said progesterone wasn't very good topically because you couldn't measure it in the serum, any change in progesterone after applications of creams. However, I know that's wrong. The pharmacy I worked with provided progesterone 100 milligram per gram cream. And I don't know if they used 1 or 2 doses. It was at a department, I think at Dartmouth. And they got 1 to 3 nanograms per mil, good follicular. I go, that's wonderful. And they were kind of disappointed, but of course they weren't picturing it 1,000 times. I said, no, you're perfect. That shows the cream was absorbed. You're in a good follicular level, which is a level that you should be at, I believe, for the duration of your life. After you stop ovulating, it's up to your adrenals to keep you going, and your adrenals can and will if they're working, but our high stress of our living is completely decimated the power of our adrenals. So fortunately, this is really fortunate. When you use that progesterone, however you use it, it's going all over the place. It has a lot of functions to serve, and it goes through the blood-brain barrier. You can use it to help with mood issues. Definitely, we see that, and we see that very quickly. Those histamine responses can be tempered by progesterone. So it's all over. And then we're so afraid of it. I can't believe the stories I see on Facebook. So not being at a pharmacy anymore and listening to the patient calls with their questions, I decided to add myself to a few Facebook groups. And practitioners, you should go there because it's eye-opening. That's where you're going to see your failures.
Exactly. Talk to us about some of those failures, some of the common failures that you're seeing on the social media.
Okay, common. Now I've heard these words out of your mouth, low and slow, and that might be okay for somebody gently aging with adding progesterone, but there are a lot of women who are not, and these women need to be treated like we treated aggressively for PMS, because that's where they are. They're in severe progesterone deficits. And then we have this whole cadre, 700,000 surgeries a year, a lot of them with oophorectomies, ovaries removed, and not remove the surgery damages the output of the ovaries in many, many cases. We have those women who are taught that they don't need progesterone because they don't have a uterus. Well, why? I don't know how any doctor, and this is coming from the North American Menopause Association, it's coming from ACOG, American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, even the Endocrine Society. They decided this by committee, and that talking point gets distilled all over to the medical industry, and it's repeated and repeated. And progesterone is needed more than ever, because not only did they have the surgery because of low progesterone, now they still have low progesterone and they've endured the stress of surgery, and they've endured the stress of losing access to other hormones that are so essential for everything working together. Those women need progesterone, and they need a lot of it. Dr. Katarina Dalton covered that too. She said women with hysterectomy need more progesterone than women with natural menopause.
Give us a ballpark of one of your favorite starting dosages and your favorite route for oophorectomy, or same thing, a woman in menopause. Let's talk dosages. A woman in menopause or a woman who's had an oophorectomy. What route do you like? I just want your favorite, and what dosage do you like to start at? How high are you willing to go?
Okay, another favorite person of mine, Dr. Jerilynn Prior, researcher at University of British Columbia in Vancouver, who's done a lot of work on osteoporosis, especially in young athletic women. They are too athletic, actually, and suddenly don't have any cycling. They just burn through their progesterone, they burn through their estrogen, and they had high risk for bone formation, which is really dependent on your younger years. She never starts women on lower than 300 milligrams of oral progesterone. And that's what she has available to her. She's in kind of a conventional situation. There's FDA in Canada's approved drug products, oral capsules and oil. So that's what she uses. So she has good evidence that that's at least the amount you need for bone restructuring. Progesterone triggers new bone growth. Estrogen,
it supports the cells, the osteoblasts, that lays down new bone. I don't know of any other biochemical that does that to osteoblasts.
Maybe testosterone, but I don't know for sure. I haven't seen, or maybe DHEA too. I haven't seen strong evidence. But progesterone really is a big key. So what are these people prescribing 30 milligrams of progesterone doing for their patients? Nothing, nothing. And yet this is taught. I was at A4M as you, and I hear doctors teaching new doctors to use these tiny bits. Women are flipping out. They're actually becoming suicidal, running to emergency rooms because their heart's out of control. They have this exacerbation of all the estrogen effects, maybe adrenaline too. Progesterone stimulates the activity. Now, John Lee, I'll agree with him on this one. He recommended that if you had somebody on estrogen, and maybe think about those women who had their ovaries removed, and they're offered estrogen only when your ovaries made all kinds of things. I think there's some serious problems with our knowledge of physiology and biochemistry if we accept that one hormone ought to do you. So if you don't like half the amount of estrogen, and then he was saying relatively low doses, you run into all kinds of trouble. And I see that problem over and over and over again. Could we talk about PMDD?
I would like to go there after you answer this one question.
Okay.
Rarely, and it is rare, I run across women who just don't seem to tolerate almost any dosage form or route of administration. I saw it first in a woman who had a hysterectomy in 30 years prior, and she had never been given progesterone. She was given Premarin, and she wanted to switch to bioidenticals, and I immediately wanted to put her on progesterone. Have you run across this, a special sensitivity, a weird sensitivity to progesterone that almost any dose doesn't seem to be accepted?
First of all, when you say sensitivity, how does that present?
They get overdose symptoms almost immediately. And then even if you bring the dosage way, way down, maybe 1/10 or even 100th of what we ordinarily would prescribe right out of the gate, they're still getting overdose symptoms.
Okay,
Like
what's
they
an
wake up
overdose?
groggy, they feel depressed.
Okay. Not getting enough would be my first thought, but there are other factors in here, and it makes it a little more complicated. One is you actually can be allergic to progesterone. And I thought to myself, how could that be? Because you usually form antibodies to a protein, and progesterone's in the fat family. It's not a protein. So how can you be allergic to progesterone? Makes no sense at all to me. However, I learned later that it goes on a carrier protein, and then you have a complex, progesterone and carrier protein. And it actually is possible to create antibodies to that complex. And that has been offered, tests for that have actually been offered by some labs. And
Why is it that that wouldn't also occur with testosterone or estrogens being on that same carrier protein or a similar carrier protein? Because I have yet to see that degree of sensitivity with any estrogens or testosterone. It seems to be peculiar to progesterone.
They have different carrier proteins. Maybe that's part of the story. Maybe because the amount of progesterone that your body really needs it's like such a magnitude of difference that we don't notice it. I don't know, but I was astounded. How do you get rid of that? The only way I know is to follow like the American Association of Environmental Medicine and do detoxification, and they have allergy elimination techniques that could potentially do this. Now, I've talked to Dr. Morton Teach, practices in New York City. He's a former president of AAEM, and he still does that allergy elimination thing. I think there's NAET too. There's other ones, but he had dilutions of progesterone in his office. And he told me one day this woman came in with severe PMS symptoms. She's crying and she can't hardly talk. And he gave her several different dilutions of progesterone to try. Instantaneously, when I got the right one for her, it was gone.
Phenomenal. It's just astounding. And it speaks to the depth of the knowledge base and the experience. And this is not a game for amateurs. This is, you want to start working in the hormone world. There's a million moving parts. I encourage everyone to do so. It's an amazing world. There's so much that we can use clinically to support people. And that example of that progesterone and desensitizing someone to a progesterone allergy by using dilutions, that's phenomenal.
Then I'd like to bring in another big problem. And I would say I consider underdosing the first big problem. The second big one is the allergy stuff. It's there, but I don't think it's as prevalent as these top two. And it's disordered gut with candida overgrowing. And candida, some forms of these microbes actually make estrogen. Something to think about.
Hmm.
And then Candida does two things. I've only been able to find two mechanisms why it may be disturbing. So progesterone has this activity where it can help normalize blood sugars and probably has a good effect on insulin resistance too. But Candida will grow. Extra Candida will grow when you've brought them more nutrition. And a fed Candida culture can grow 100 times a day. I forgot which immune protein that we've identified, but when you're pregnant, progesterone is at extreme levels. And now we're up to more like 200 nanograms per milliliter. And that suppresses the ability of our body to reject the foreign body we're growing within us. And for this reason, I've often thought that we should use progesterone in organ transplants rather than some of the horrible drugs we're using. I think it would work, but we need somebody
There's
to
a
try
theory.
it.
If we want more,
Yeah,
want
we
more
need
science
to.
behind that one.
Yeah, we
Would
need to
you
do that.
shift over to what you wanted to speak about, which is PMDD? I rudely interrupted you there.
Oh, not so rudely. So PMDD, it happened in the late 80s.
Stands for
Premenopausal dysphoric disorder.
premenstrual
Premenstrual
dysphoric disorder. Otherwise, the supplanted PMS. Is it? Are we talking about the same thing there?
I'm talking about PMS. They grabbed onto all the emotional things with PMS, and they created a new disease. And if you want to talk about a progesterone conspiracy here, so Katarina solved it. She published it in 1953. Why don't we all know about using progesterone for all of this? We don't have to have this. So along comes Eli Lilly, a drug company that made Prozac, and it was going off patent. And so they were hunting for new uses that they could get a new drug approval for Prozac, essentially. And they did this. They did a study, and they were able to show that women with these severe emotional issues during the luteal phase had a 50% improvement with the use of Prozac on their mood stuff. So they petitioned the FDA for a new drug approval for this new disease they called PMDD. And they brought along the other companies that had the SSRI, selective serotonin receptor inhibitors. I'm trying to remember all the acronyms.
Reuptake inhibitors, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So that whole class of drugs also got this approval. And it didn't actually get classified as a disease. It went into the DSM, the collection of mental stuff that we put diagnostic codes. It didn't actually get in there for a few years later. So the FDA approved this drug use for a disease that wasn't created quite yet. It was in process. And I knew about this at the time, and I wasn't really concerned at the time because I knew progesterone worked. If you used enough of it, it would work pretty much. And if you worked with some of these compounded issues that you can work with, you should be able to handle it. So I didn't think that this would go much farther, but I was so surprised because I have stuff on my website. I've been on webinars and podcasts advocating higher doses of progesterone for these symptoms. And I got an email from a woman in the UK. And she has a Facebook page, and it is dedicated to women who've had hysterectomy and oophorectomy as the end treatment for their PMDD, their diagnosis of PMDD, and are still suffering. And they have been taught by their practitioners that they have to avoid progesterone at all costs. I went to Wikipedia and had a look at what they were saying about PMDD there. So the gold standard, of course, is what Eli Lilly and the other companies achieved. You need to use an SSRI first. And then your next choice might be birth control pills, which is fake hormones, altered hormones, don't belong in your body. Then you might use a drug that interferes with your pituitary signaling to your body to make progesterone and other hormones too, sort of a chemical castration. That's the third. And then finally,
what is that drug that's recommended?
drugs like Lupron. There's more than one. There's more than one now, but that's the kind of drug that's used. And then if all that doesn't work, and of course it doesn't because you haven't used progesterone, then you go to the surgery. And progesterone's never mentioned here.
Well, okay. Well, I want to get you to hunker down on the right way to do this. So I'm going to give you a couple of scenarios. You've got a young woman in her 20s. She's got severe PMS, PMDD, excuse me. And you know she's not ovulating. She's got irregular periods. That's the tip off. What kind of dosages do you like to give, and what route?
Okay, when you're going to start it, you need to have plenty of progesterone around. When I worked at the pharmacy, we started with 100 milligrams of progesterone in oil-filled capsules 4 times a day. And
4 times a day, so 400 milligrams a day. Good to hear that.
Minimum. And then we went up higher.
What's the range? What's the upper limit? How high did you go?
The most I've seen, now I can't recall because we also started doing other dosage forms to get progesterone in more ways than just the capsules. And the highest I'd seen when I worked there was about 2,500 milligrams, and it might not all be the capsules. I've since seen on Facebook some women using more than that. I just saw 3,000.
And when we say these phenomenal numbers, we got to realize that when you take steroid hormone orally, you're only getting a small percentage. Like, what percentage do you think actually makes it through first pass to actually function throughout the body as pure progesterone? You swallow 200 milligrams. How many milligrams are actually making it past first pass to the liver?
I don't know that you can measure milligrams. They just reviewed Hargrove and Maxon's paper, the biologic activity of oral progesterone, and they were getting in one patient in this chart, 200 milligram dose got them to high luteal 20. But it varied. There was only one like that. 200 got to mid luteal, and a few just I would consider little bumps. It was very illustrative that people don't absorb. I'd also like to say that when you have an oral capsule with oil, or if you eat it with food with fats, you're going to get improved absorption because the progesterone is not broken down by the stomach like a protein would be. It's taken up with chylomicrons, one of the cholesterol type carrier things. It's taken up there and it goes into the lymph system. And so this idea that it just goes to the liver and is excessive, not that it's not going to the liver, it's going there quickly, but it's not going there first. Now, one thing what you say, and I'm surprised even professionals don't quite understand what that means, the first pass liver thing. There are certainly a lot of people that think you're sparing the liver. Whatever you put on never gets to the liver, which is false. It's a technique that you use to increase the blood level before it gets to the liver. So you really literally have seconds from putting something on your skin, say the progesterone, and it gets into your bloodstream. It's to your liver very quickly. However, wherever you put it on as it's going into the bloodstream there, if that tissue has a need for that hormone, it has a higher level available to it for those few seconds, and your body will do that. Hence, we have already know that if you put vaginal estrogens, those hormones are absorbed better there, and they have good access there to the organs and the tissue there. For example, estradiol, I've seen estradiol is just magnificent for vaginal dryness. But if you use it, somebody's written a paper, more than one, measuring the change in estradiol in the serum from that vaginal application, getting no change to some change. So I think it's very, very variable according to the patient. That's another problem with our studies, right? We pick a cohort to represent everybody, and nothing could be further than the truth.
The variation individual to individual is astronomical.
Yes.
Like some young women, for example, they need this much estrogen to be normal, regularly menstruate, be fertile. Other young women need 3 times this much, and everyone in the between there is totally normal. So the very individual variation. I still want to take you back. What I was really trying to illustrate is you don't have to be afraid of these numbers. So you're administering 200 milligrams, 400 milligrams. That's not what's making it into your circulation. And there's a big protection in so many instances. There's an internal protection. These hormones are the most powerful biochemicals in our body. So if we take too much of it, we don't feel good. You take too much progesterone, you're going to get overdosed and you're going to feel it. It's not like it's going to go silent and undermine you there. You're going to get groggy. You're going to feel drunk. You're going to lose your balance. You're going to feel depressed. So there's protection there. So don't be afraid of the numbers is what I'm really trying to say. And you've been a pioneer in encouraging us along with Jerilynn Prior. And I learn about Dr. Dalton is use what you need, folks. Yes. The young woman's body is rich with progesterone. And gosh, in a menopausal state, if you need to restore those bones, yeah, bravo estrogen, bravo testosterone, absolutely, and other things related to the bones. But get enough rich doses of progesterone and they're going to lay down new bone, folks. You can get recovery there.
And Ellen Gaby wrote a book about that decades ago, Reversing Osteoporosis. So that's an alarming area where women are just they're encouraged to do a DEXA scan. They're of course diagnosed as osteopenic or osteoporosis, and they're offering these drugs, which are a horror. They actually freeze your bone remodeling. So you basically save old bone. You don't build new bone. And as a result, those bones are very prone to breaking when you have an impact, and they fracture and splinter, so they're much harder to heal.
We're listening to a pharmacist, folks, who's given her life over to the study of these things.
Right. And I'll tell you, dentists sure know about the problems because they could have a potential implant patient. Well, not with these drugs aboard, because it requires you're drilling into bone, and that bone has to heal, and the drug will prevent it. Why? are we embracing this paralyzing of bone? But let's go back to PMDD.
Oh, wait a minute. Now you triggered another fireworks. I mean, dentistry should know about this.
They do. Believe me, they do.
They do. They know about the value. I didn't mean so much the.
I mean, not about progesterone.
Yeah, I was thinking about the value of hormone replenishing, led by progesterone. I wonder if there's if they could prepare a patient. I don't know. I mean, this is just coming off the top of my head through the fireworks that you stimulate in there.
They surely could, and some dentists have actually learned a little bit about hormones, and they would like to, but they feel very constrained about their practice scope.
Yeah.
So we have this technique of cutting our body into unique parts and assigning it different specialties. In Europe, they're a little bit better. They know that the head is attached to the body and things go to. They know.
Really?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. I'm having a little challenge with that concept there, girl.
Actually, when I met my husband, he told me he was a psychoneuroendocrinologist. And I said, how can you have a PhD in something that most practitioners don't believe, that the head is connected to the body?
I'd like us to capitalize on so many other subjects that you're so knowledgeable about. I'd like us to return back to, if you have more to say about insulin resistance and the relationship of insulin and midlife, and would you take off from there?
Yeah, well, let's do that, because here's a big area that women, and I'm going to add men, are treating very well, and it's the young ones. And ultimately, when they try to have a child, they get a PCOS diagnosis. And what happens with PCOS is
polycystic ovarian syndrome.
Yes, thank you. We forget, we say these things all the time and expect everybody to know what it is. So you get pituitary stimulation to the ovaries or to the adrenals. It could be adrenal related PCOS. The consequence is that for some reason, your body is not able to be doing enough progesterone. Progesterone levels tank, but because of this continuous stimulation, which also stimulates testosterone, and in the case of the adrenals, it's DHEA. So you can have one or the other or both. All of that can occur. Now, with the adrenal one, it's a deficit of cortisol, but it's also a deficit of progesterone, because progesterone to cortisol is one metabolic step, and our body uses progesterone as a stress reserve all the time. So these poor people have this really kind of complicated endocrine situation. But what causes it in the first place? And I believe the cause is back to poor control of insulin and glucose. And look at the way we are eating. You can hardly go into a grocery store and find real food anymore. Everything is denatured and diluted with the substances our bodies need to thrive with. So primary, they should be put on an eating program of some sort, which will bring the insulin resistance down, because that's the common thread. And how do you bring it down?
These foods are overloaded with sugars because they're processed, and they're underwhelmed with nutrients. So you eat a meal and your brain goes, hey, where's my zinc? Where's my CoQ10? I got to go out and graze through more food. So you graze through more calories in order to meet up these deficits. Is that how you see it?
So what we're having is these foods will cause a rise in glucose, and as glucose drops, insulin goes up. But this we're not getting the glucose into our system sufficiently enough, and the insulin keeps rising and rising. We've now got a little smarter by realizing that we should be checking for insulin when we do a blood test to see if those are abnormally high. And Dr. Tinsdale, who I know you know, I just heard a lecture by her, and then she said, that's not the be all and end all, because early insulin resistance you can measure by not a fasting, but you postprandial after a meal, 2 hours. When you're in this continuum of insulin resistance, you're already spiking too much insulin during that meal, and it doesn't show up on the fasting insulin test. So there's another opportunity to identify somebody who's off. But you can look at them and see that they are not in the best of health. So, Dr. Rosensweet, how about when your patient walks in your office, I would bet any amount of money that your brain is already considering that as a diagnosis, and what is telling you, what are the signs when you see that patient, that this is something that you should verify and consider.
Well, if they're overweight.
Yeah, but there can be underweight ones too. That's tricky.
Mm.
And they may have more acne, they have some facial hair growth.
Well, here we're going to the PCOS, right?
Yeah, the PCOS, they have changes in their body that looks more androgenic, more masculine.
Talk about that, the details of the biochemistry there. Dive in there if you would. The relationship of insulin and testosterone. I know you've mentioned it. Go in again with it.
Okay, so testosterone is elevated. If you measure it, it's elevated. So you're getting all these symptoms of elevations of that hormone, and it actually does make you fat. Although depending on where you are in that, you may not present that way. And estrogen can be affected too, but I have heard that it could be normal, low, or elevated. You really have to check on your particular patient. Now, I don't know, that might be just a little bit of how estrogen does move around, and you take the test at a particular time. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the bottom line. So I'm not sure, but a primary treatment needs to take care of that insulin resistance. So what makes insulin treatable is, one is how and what you eat. You don't want these sharp glucose rises and sharper insulin rises, and exercise helps that too. Interesting. And so if you are a young girl and you're in college, you go to the student center, and this is all happening to you. If that practitioner is smart enough to recognize these symptoms of PCOS, the only treatment these young girls get is metformin, which is a drug designed to keep your glucose levels lower, not addressing the underlying causes or the hormone imbalance. Nothing. In fact, I've talked to some of these practitioners in student health, and I said, progesterone would just be so wonderful, because progesterone has an effect on blood sugar, normalizing blood sugar. So it would really help this insulin resistance piece as well. But they can't.
It affects thyroid as well. What's the relationship of progesterone to thyroid? Review that with us.
Okay, so Ray Peat said this, which I always liked. He said, if you have a list of things that disturb your thyroid, it can be as long as your arm in small print. And if he said 3 things help your thyroid, and they are pregnenolone, progesterone, and coconut oil. Yeah, you ever have one of those quizzes which doesn't belong? But progesterone does work. It helps your body convert into active thyroid. Your thyroid gland puts out some active, but the majority needs one more step to convert to active. So progesterone helps
Where
them.
I first found myself fascinated by this was in some woman who's wanting to assess whether she's ovulating or not with fertility in mind. And so she takes her basal body temperature, and mystically, if she ovulates, her temperature goes up. And the relationship there is if she ovulates, the progesterone skyrockets and facilitates the action of thyroid hormone in thyroid receptors. So thyroid works better mid-cycle if she ovulates. And what happens when thyroid works better? Your whole metabolism, your ability to burn food and create energy and heat increases. Your heat increases. Progesterone facilitates the action of thyroid. Do I have that right?
Yep. And then there's another little piece was published. Somebody was tracking TSH, free T3, free T4 when taking progesterone, and free T4 actually increased. So I was surprised but delighted. So yeah, this helps your thyroid excrete a little more thyroid to work with. So there's at least two that I know of. I would like to say this mystery of coconut oil, though. So, we think about coconut oil, we think about short chain fatty acids, butyric acid, caprylic acid, which are very good nutrients for us. They're in the medium chain triglycerides that give our body energy. But why would coconut oil be so good? So I did a bit of a dive into coconut oil, and it has substances that are related to cholesterol. There's a 4-ring molecule. If I can bring you back to the progesterone picture you showed, that 4-ring structure is common to cholesterol and all the hormones that are made from cholesterol, and bile and vitamin D. And in our plant world, we have those. Now we know that we make progesterone from wild yam commercially because it's got that 4-ring structure, and we just have to change a few things, and we'll probably have to methylate it. I know we have to knock off a couple rings on the yam one, but this steroid nucleus, that 4-ring nucleus, appears all over the plant world. And when we talk about herbs that are adaptogenic, if you start looking like what are the major ingredients that they found in those herbs, there'll be that 4-ring nucleus. So you'll have, they'll usually name it oside. So if you have.
So these 4 rings right here?
Yes. Those 4 rings are all over the plant world, and they are so effective, and they're all the adrenal adaptogen herbs, or even wild yam itself, because it has that, plus it's got 2 more rings, are effective, have an effect on our body. We resonate, or we use that thing. I was beginning to think it's the God molecule or something.
You're a little biased, Carol.
Yeah, I know, but it's so important. And then we turn around and we're trying to stop it with another nasty class of drugs, statins, because it's trying to interfere with your production of cholesterol. And I don't know of doctors who are being trained to look at if your cholesterol is high, why is it high?
What?
Why is it high?
That's a radical question to be asking. Why is it high? Is that what you said?
Yeah, it's high. If, let's say, something's happened to you and you need to remodel and make new cells, your cholesterol's going to go up, so you can do that. If you are making a baby, your cholesterol goes up so you can make new cells. If your testosterone is low, or probably many more of those, your body's going to gear up to make more hormone out of cholesterol. If your thyroid is low, this is well documented by Broda Barnes, say cholesterol is a better measure of low thyroid than the thyroid tests we have available. So if cholesterol's high, you got to look at, is this low thyroid? If a man has had sex within a few hours of testing, his cholesterol is high. Do
Can I interrupt
doctors?
you again? In 1968, I was a senior medical student, and I had the privilege of doing 3 months with a world expert in thyroid. And back then, we didn't have thyroid tests. PBI was protein-bound iodine was how we measured things. And his comment was, listen, you do not need tests to evaluate someone's thyroid status. Ask them a series of questions and do a physical exam. You'll learn everything you need to know. But listen, if you really got to do a test to measure thyroid, if someone's hypothyroid, measure their cholesterol. It's going to be elevated if they're low in thyroid.
Yep.
I just wanted to emphasize that. Please continue.
So we really don't do a differential diagnosis and try to ask why it's elevated. And then, is it really elevated too high? So I have a book, I'll think of the guy's name in a minute. It's about medical myths. And in this book, he relates a study, and I think it was done by Metropolitan Life Insurance. And they have a big financial reason to be interested in what human longevity looks like. And they looked at cholesterol, and the best level for cholesterol for longevity was 270.
Ah, holy mackerel. Oh
And
my
then,
God, Carol, that's so beautiful. Metropolitan Life, boy, you want to believe them. They have a vested interest in this.
yes. So also Dr. Thomas Lewis, he's not a medical person, but he's partnered with medical people, but he's looking at our various tests, and he has combed the literature, thousands and thousands of citations, and he was trying to say, in this range of what's getting reported to us, where's the best place to be? And I heard a lecture, I've interviewed him, I've looked at what he's offering, I read one of his books. And so cholesterol, he was very adamant in a lecture I heard last time. He said, if you're not at least between 200 and 260, you're going to suffer. It's pretty much what
one
he
thing
said.
I would like to say that we have tremendous respect for arterial health here.
Yeah.
We're not trying to say that we don't want to pay attention to the arteries. My God, you've written a book on it, haven't you, on nitric oxide? Or you definitely have a major interest in this. We just are wanting to divert attention away from things that are not necessarily true about arteriosclerosis, just for a caveat there.
Well,
What about young, healthy people, though? I mean, teenagers, people in their 20s, they're running cholesterols less than 200. Just comment on that.
Not very healthy. They can't repair. They can't make their hormones properly. When you drive it way down, they've discovered that death from all kinds of reasons increase.
It's a common side effect of cholesterol. Not common, but it's listed in the package insert on cholesterol lowering drugs. There's a possible complication called death by suicide because you get so depressed because you're not producing these steroid hormones. Not common. We don't want to scare you away, but you want to be careful if you're lowering your cholesterol, for God's sakes, because you're not going to be making your steroid hormones, for one thing.
Or there have been autistic kids they finally take their cholesterol levels and they're down like 100.
Wow.
And they thrive.
Wow.
If you feed them more cholesterol. But really the food you eat doesn't matter as much as your liver. Your liver is really in charge of cholesterol. There was a study, I think it was a Finnish study with young men eating 12 eggs a day, high cholesterol food, but it made no difference to their cholesterol numbers. None. What have we been doing?
Well, isn't it so intimately connected with glucose and storage that if your insulin glucose regulating mechanism is not functioning properly, you're going to store stuff. I'm not remembering exactly the relationship, but when you've got insulin resistance, you're not only going to see elevated blood glucose or hemoglobin A1C, you're going to get elevations of triglycerides. You're going to get elevations of cholesterol. Aren't they all interrelated?
Well, you would think so, but I think the whole cholesterol story misses the mark, because Ansel Keys, who first put that out there, he eliminated all the data, and he had lots of them, lots of different countries, and he just picked the ones that showed what his hypothesis was. So he narrowed it down to 7 that he could create a nice graph with. And for some reason, we just took that and made it the holy grail.
Yeah.
It's a very sad thing, and it's kind of horrific putting that metabolic block on what I just called the God molecule. So why would we do that? I was at a conference on Low Carb USA, it was, and several speakers who were extremely athletic had very elevated LDL. Yeah, LDL. And they were healthier than a lot of people around there that didn't have elevated LDL. So I'm not so sure that what we think we know about that. I don't like when people say good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, good estrogen, bad estrogen. Those molecules are all there for a reason. And yes, there could be imbalances, but it doesn't make it a bad molecule and you've got to get rid of it at all costs. It's there for a function. So I just
want to lead you into another one. Our time is drawing to a close, and I want to lead you into another one of your special interests, because we're in the territory, the terrain of arteries. Talk to us about how you got interested in nitric oxide and where all this plays in.
Oh, well, nitric oxide. Now this is more complicated than I like to have it, but nitric oxide, let's say for sure for blood pressure, relaxes your epithelium, allows more blood flow. The going toward like a common problem in men as they have problems with erections, they're not getting enough blood flow into their penis. So that's very illustrative. But the hormones have effects on your ability to make nitric oxide. Right now, we are trying to give the body precursors, they're like arginine, citrulline, beets, arugula, to give our bodies the ability, the raw materials to make nitric oxide. But nitric oxide is very ephemeral. It poof, and it's gone. But you can see the results. I would say if you're taking one of these products and your blood pressure goes down, you can assume that maybe it had an effect. Or if you're a male and your erections improved, you can assume that maybe it had an effect. But it goes through, so these foods provide nitrates. And we have test strips. You can measure the nitrate and they'll turn nice and purple when you have plenty of it. But it still is not the answer to whether you made the next step to the nitric oxide. We don't know that unless we have a relief of symptoms. So I'm not saying it's not important, but it's more complicated. Then there's this other deal in your mouth. You have all these bacteria that's supposed to make you make nitric oxide. We are dependent on our mouth microbes. So maybe it does depend on how much you chew your food just from nitric oxide presentation. So that's really important. So a lot of the supplements will be a lozenge or chewable or something because they want to take advantage of the bacteria in your mouth to go to the next step. There's still a lot we don't know, but if you have like hypertension, I don't think you should just accept it. I think you should look into what is the cause of that. Nitric oxide deficiency. Certainly too much adrenaline is going to squeeze up your blood vessels. And guess what beta blocker drugs are? What are they beta blocking?
Adrenaline.
Right. And ACE inhibitors, adrenaline again. So when you could potentially look at an elevated blood pressure as a problem to be solved and look back to the origins of it instead of artificially trying to treat it.
Carol Petersen. Holy mackerel. I know you well enough to know that this is going to happen, and I'm so grateful, a tsunami of interesting connections here. And I, for one, just am so grateful to know you. So grateful you've been working your whole professional lifetime to help help promote so many different aspects of health. And as a champion of progesterone, let us not forget that you led the way with recommending progesterone for women. Progesterone's deficient in so many women. If a young woman has a irregular period, she is probably not ovulating, and she's probably majorly deficient in progesterone. And we know for sure, and all of a sudden I'm ignited again, Carol, just to give her accolades. But I did want to bring in that it's so common for reasons that I don't understand that, yes, a woman can still ovulate and still produce rich progesterone, but although progesterone and estrogen are declining as a woman gets into her 20s and 30s, the progesterone can decline earlier and deeper than the estrogen. And oh my God, I want to take a sidetrack again. Can you explain why does this happen? I mean, this is an observed phenomena that progesterone can decline earlier and deeper. Do you agree with that? And
yes, and if you're in your early 30s, it could be happening, and you can be miserable, and most practitioners won't have a clue what to do with you. And you could start then with some support, and you could start with, if your adrenals need support, both phases, not just the luteal, depends on the presentation of symptoms. But it's amazing how simple biochemistry, and it's so ignored. Excuse me, I have to get a drink.
I guess. Yeah, that brings me to another question, that as we go to supplement progesterone, well, first I want to say that a young woman can be regularly cycling, thus she is ovulating, but she can still be low in progesterone as it's declined earlier and deeper than the estrogen, and she can be estrogen dominant because of that.
Yes, and let me interject a couple more things. Jerilynn Prior found that you can look like you're cycling, but you haven't ovulated. And that becomes more obvious when you're trying to do fertility work. And you can have shortened cycle. You can have some progesterone made, but it's shortened. She just finished a study at the end of 2020, and it was something involved with Environment Canada, but because she has this interest in the menstrual cycle, she added this onto it. She had a cohort of 100 healthy young women aged 18 to 35, so no apparent illness. And she found that 68% of those women had missed ovulations and or shortened luteal phases, 68%. Now, she had done something very similar about 5-6 years earlier The cohort was bigger, and it was 300. And in that cohort, there were 10% of missed ovulation and shortened luteal phase. So you think, my God, what's going on? So it could be simply as much as this miasm of fear going on. It's what I call it. It could do it. It can deplete you of progesterone. That caused it. It could be other causes. So I don't want to go there politically.
Can it be an amplification of need for adrenal hormones and thus suck up progesterone in the biochemical cascade where progesterone converts to cortisol, for example? Do you think that that can be taking place and that can be part of the mechanism of lowering from your miasm of fear?
Yes, definitely. And I think we should rename menopause. It should be adrenal pause, because as we naturally stop ovulating, it's up to our adrenals to carry the burden for our sex hormones and adrenal hormones. And when we hit the wall, the adrenals aren't up to it. So it's the adrenals that are pausing here. And I have read, and this was years ago, but the estimate was 80% of women at menopause have some sort of symptoms, unpleasant symptoms. That's huge. We're talking about huge numbers here. So our adrenals, we are faced with extreme stress one way or another in our daily living, whether it's pollutions or emotional stress or whatever. We have a lot to handle. So I kind of poo-poo when somebody said, well, my mother didn't hit menopause till 55. So that's what I can expect. You can't expect that anymore. Your mother lived in a cleaner, nicer world with a lot less stress than we're being faced with today.
Wow, another subject. I want to circle back though. When you treat a young woman in her 30s, and even if she's regularly menstruating, but you're identifying the possibility that she's not producing ample progesterone, do you treat her only during the second half of the cycle, or do you try and replenish her progesterone levels also in the first half of the cycle? How do you personally recommend there?
If there's symptoms, and for progesterone, I really like the symptom of anxiety. It's quick to resolve, and it's very common. So let's say there is anxiety, mild, during the first part of the cycle. And then when you hit the luteal phase, all of a sudden, all sorts of problems arise. All of the PMS symptoms just emerge. So I would cycle with that woman, but I probably support the follicular phase too, and then the adrenal phase. And another clue to the follicular phase would be the amount of flow those women are experiencing. If there is heavy bleeding and clotting and whatever, you know for sure that there was not enough progesterone in the follicular state, and do something about it, because those women are getting fast-tracked over to the surgery, which they don't need. You can fix it very easily. So sad.
In my menopause education period, when I started out 30 years ago, there wasn't that much known. I mean, there was Dr. Lee, and there wasn't a heck of a lot else. And so I figured that I would give women some information and give them the tools like the progesterone, the estrogens, testosterone, and we would gradually titrate up to optimal levels. And women would come to me and say this, you suggested that I take the progesterone during the second half of my cycle, and, it really helps. I really like it. Would it be okay if I took it during the first half of my cycle too? And what did I know? I didn't know. So I said, yeah, sure, try it. they'd say, well, I already have, and it works great.
Great.
The first half of my cycle. My education came in the trenches also.
Yeah, that's where we get a lot of education, and it's too bad we can't document the rich experience of everybody who's tried to help people in this arena, because really that's the most lovely. Doctors are trained to work in flow charts. I even wrote a blog, The Tyranny of Flow Charts, and we have to ask them to throw that away, because, as you said, the individually operating person, but they have to come equipped with, pull back their knowledge of biochemistry, physiology that they learned before it was essential for their medical education to get into medical school, and go back there and start to think about the processes that are actually going on in the body. And we're so lucky. You know, we're the first time in human history we have these tools that we can top off our steroidal hormones. It's exciting that can happen. I talked to a woman she tried suicide twice, and she's got surgery now, and 4 children, and can't afford the children, and her husband's sick too. And she started crying. And she said, can you tell me, do I have any hope at all? And I said, you know, you've been missing progesterone for a good part of your life. What you've related to me, you could have had an intervention earlier if that was available to us. But unfortunately not. But after the surgery, it's so important that we support those women too. They are so hormone deficit.
God.
And if you don't, you know, you are costing that woman 10 years of their life. It's been documented that oophorectomy and hysterectomy shortens your lifespan. So are you getting that information before you decide to do this major cutting up of your body? You're not.
That's the part that is so alarming, and I know it is alarming to you, is that all these hysterectomies and oophorectomies, what percentage of them could be prevented, not even needed, if you were to replenish progesterone and perhaps other ovarian hormones if needed? What percentage would you make a wild guess?
Okay. I've changed my mind about this, because I used to say almost all reasons for hysterectomy were caused by low progesterone. And now I'm edging more toward 100%, because I believe you wouldn't be developing cancers either. And we kind of put that in a special slot, like it's untreatable. University of San Diego, I think, did a study on endometrial cancer and progesterone receptors. Strangely enough, in their preamble, they were talking about how we used to treat endometrial cancer with progesterone with quite a bit of success. But now we're doing surgeries, right? We just forget that part. We'll just cut it out. But interesting what they noted, and they were going to develop a test for this, that as the endometrial cancer progressed and got worse and worse and worse, progesterone receptors declined in number or effectiveness. Whoa.
Oh my goodness gracious, balls of fire. My own time is elapsed today. This is the second ending, but I'm so grateful to you. I appreciate it. Of course, it's just the hugest amount of fun to just go back and forth and explore these topics that are so interest to us. And thank you for your pioneering, and thank you for your presence, and thank you for your ongoing activity, which is robust. And thanks for doing this with us today. It's been such an honor and a pleasure.
I'm so appreciative of what you're doing for organizing us to make sure these options are open and available to women, and not messed up by some political activities. So we have to be ever vigilant. It's too bad that we have come to this end that we actually sometimes don't get access to the very thing that we need.
Yes,
So thank you.
you're welcome, and thank you for participating in that. And it's so important that we preserve our right to give these fantastic, powerful, replenishing hormones that can do so much, so much. And we want to protect the right to continue to be able to give them. And of course, that's one of the purposes of interviewing someone like you, is to inspire physicians and providers and nurse practitioners, pharmacists. We may need to mobilize to protect these. We may need to mobilize big time. So that's a whole other story. And once again, Carol, thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
So I'm going to complete for today, and